Hi, welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by David Gallo. David, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Marcus.
All right, so David, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Well, for about the last 30 plus years, almost 40, depending on where you start, I've been studying the ocean. And in that regard, mostly the deep ocean. That was really my thesis research. And then what I was doing mostly was mapping underwater mountains and volcanoes and these deep valleys like the San Andreas or even the Grand Canyon, like 5 times wider and deeper than the Grand Canyon. And then I got into other things like the Titanic, which is in the very deep ocean, learning how to map that, and also co-led an expedition to find the missing airliner, Air France 447. So little by little over time, I went from pure science as a graduate student, undergraduate, then graduate, and then I got into more varied things like the Titanic or Air France, climate change, interested in that, and water. So it's a whole spectrum of things now.
When you say Air France, is that the airliner that disappeared? Was it in the flying to the Philippines? Is it that one, or am I mistaken?
Air France was before that, 2009-ish, and it was traveling from Rio to Paris and disappeared over the South Atlantic, landed right on top of one of those underwater mountain ranges that I had studied for my thesis. Talking about the Malaysian Air Flight 370, which is the mystery flight left from Kuala Lumpur and never head for Beijing and never seen again. And a lot of effort to try to find that. I'm involved in the fringes of that, maybe getting more and more involved in it because, I'm sure it can be found. I'm positive it can be found. It's just a matter of finding the haystack and then looking for the needle in that haystack. But the haystack first.
So I guess one question I want to ask when it comes to just the ocean in general, what are some, I guess, popular misconceptions that you think that the average American has about the ocean?
Boy. Yeah, well, I'll tell you a bunch of them. One is that it's too big to fail. That's not true. Well, let me tell you some of the things, a couple of things. One is that it covers 70% of the planet. It's on average 2 miles deep. The deepest part, 7 miles, which is like when you see a plane, a jet in the sky with a vapor trail out the back, that's 7 miles. That's the deepest the ocean gets. But, that's a lot of water. And yet, so far, we've only explored about 8% of the oceans, even though it's most of the planet. And even more interesting is that we know today that every other breath of fresh air you take is from, you can count on the ocean, 50% of the oxygen comes out of the sea. Almost all the water you drink eventually comes through evaporation out of the ocean, turns into fresh water, and then rains down upon the land and ends up in rivers, streams, aquifers. And then the food we eat, about 2 billion people depend on the ocean. So the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat comes out of an ocean that's changing constantly. And we need to learn how to manage it, yet we haven't even explored it. And the other part that goes with that is no matter where you live on the planet, it can be in the coast, California, Florida, or it can be from Kansas or the heartland of Africa or the hills, mountains of China. If the oceans impact you every day, whether it's climate change, weather patterns, and conversely, anything we put on the ground in golf courses or farmlands, nutrients, pesticides, flame retardants, caffeine, pharmaceuticals. We're finding all that stuff. If you go to the middle of the ocean and look at the fish in the middle of the ocean, in the stomach you'll find little bright bits of microplastics, and in the flesh, all those things I mentioned, fertilizer, herbicides, flame retardants. So, even though the oceans are this huge thing, we imagine us like a virus. You can't see us on the Earth, and yet we've managed to change the temperature and the chemistry of the ocean and the atmosphere. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that almost every dive to the ocean comes back in a submarine or with a robot, comes back with something exciting and sometimes startling, and then even sometimes revolutionary. For instance, we used to think that you needed sunlight to have life, sunlight, then plants, then animals. So we found out that in the deep ocean on top of that mountain range, there's huge communities of life in the pitch black of the ocean with poisonous fluids coming out of the seafloor. And, there we find a density of animals and diversity, even rivals the tropical rainforest. So we were dead wrong. All those animals don't live on sunlight. They live on the chemistry of the water coming from inside the earth. So many things like that were, we assumed so many things the public did. And we need to get our act together because the ocean, it's about at the breaking point. We've actually made it more acidic than it's ever been. It absorbs about a third of the carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere. That turns it into acid, carbonic acid, which is really bad for animals that want to make shells or even sometimes a skeleton out of seawater. So pretty fascinating place. And it's only that 8%, that we're talking about. And, it's not just flat. As I said, the huge mountain ranges, huge valleys, underwater lakes, underwater rivers, underwater waterfalls that we find in the bottom of the ocean, all in that 8%. I'll stop there, but it got me off on a roll.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of things that you might have mentioned, but I guess the big thing I was thinking of is, so you say that 8% of the ocean has only been explored, and I've heard figures like that before, maybe a little bit higher figures before, but I guess I always kind of wondered is, what is that other percentage? What is that other 92%? Are we talking about specific areas of the ocean where you say, let's say, for example, the ocean on a certain spot in near Latin America is less explored than another part of the ocean? Or,
sure.
Is it kind of more like that? Or I guess, what do you mean by
that? Oh, first of all, the number, when you hear someone throw out that number 8, 9, 10, 12, some people say 6, it's got to be not accurate. So it's and it depends on what you mean by explorer. So there are some tools that the ship can go 10 miles an hour, usually maybe 12, zips along, and there are beams of sonar that you can send out from the ship that makes swaths, it makes maps of the seafloor. And you can find mountains and valleys, and you could say, well, we're exploring the seafloor. On the other hand, and you could cover a lot of ground that way. On the other hand, if you put a submarine or a robot over the side, a submarine goes a half a mile an hour, and you can only see, 30 feet ahead of you, and you can only stay down there for about 10 hours. So even though the view is more spectacular, so you're looking at details. If you look at submarines, it's hardly anything. So I think the bottom line is that there's a lot of ocean back yet to explore, but almost every place where we've done thorough work from the surface, the broad scale view, the bird's eye view, down to the detail view, find something exciting. Now, your other question, do we go back certain places? Yeah, because in the U.S., most of the exploration has been funded by the government, and so you have to write a proposal, and you almost have to predict what you're going to find by exploring, which is horrible. It's a horrible way to do. What do we got to predict? So you got to go back and back and back. Titanic is different because we'll go back and back because it's so interesting to so many people. But there are parts of the ocean, probably most of the ocean, that's absolutely flat. They're called the abyssal plains. I just don't know of anybody that's actually gone there with a submarine to look around because it's, here I go. We used to think that the deepest trenches, 7 miles deep, they're so deep, nothing will be living there. It's the same thing we said about the underwater mountain ranges. They're so deep, nothing will go there. It's pitch. So I want to take that back a little bit. But as far as we know, there's not much living in the abyssal plains, but that could be absolutely dead wrong. And then there's the whole water blanket itself, the midwater. What's going on there? It's not a big blue fishbowl. A lot of stuff going on in the midwater.
When you say abyssal plains, like what is that? Like where is that, and what does that kind of mean? And how, I mean,
Sure.
how big are we talking roughly?
Yep. Huge. So if you look at, say, going from North America to Africa, so kind of like an angle across the equator, or from even North America to Europe in a way, about right in the middle. It doesn't get deeper as you go off the continent. It goes deeper right off the bat, but then it starts to get shallower. And right smack dab in the middle of the ocean is the top of that mountain range. So it runs pretty much down the North Atlantic and South Atlantic. It mirrors the shape of the coastlines. But then, if you move off of that, you start to get progressively into deeper and deeper and deeper sediments, thicker and thicker and thicker. So about, I'd say, a good third of the ocean, maybe more, maybe it's more of the ocean, is layer upon layer upon layer, hundreds of millions of years of sediments that have been laid down over time. And there's sediments that include stuff that comes out of rivers, mud and stuff that comes out of rivers. And it's also the shells and stuff of animals that drift down slowly and land on top of it. So, it's just these things. Now, the interesting thing about that is that when you put a core and down into that, it can be 100 feet, more than 100 feet, and you pull it up, it's like a tape recorder of Earth's climate. So even though it's boring and drab to look at the surface, when it actually records Earth's climate, which is really interesting to us, how it changes over time. If you look at a map, go online, look at a topographic map of the ocean. The one you ought to look at is called Hazen and Tharp, Heezen. I could just say the Hazen map. It'll pop up. It's incredible. I mean, I love the way the artwork is fascinating. So you get the idea right away that, hey, there's mountains and valleys out there, but look at all the flat stuff.
Interesting. And you mentioned one other thing I wanted to bring up too was you said that there's waterfalls in the ocean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that you know about currents probably. Are you on the West Coast, East Coast? Where are you located?
I'm on the West Coast.
Okay. So you have the California current, which comes from north to south. On the East Coast, we have the Gulf Stream. Basically, currents take heat from the equator and move it up to the north, like the Gulf Stream does that up the East Coast, takes it up north, dumps off the heat. So when currents are warm, then when they're warm, they actually float, stay on top of the water. Now, this current goes up off the coast of England and Ireland. There's a lot of evaporation, so it takes fresh water out and it loses its heat. So now you end up with really salty, cold water, which is very dense. So then it comes down to the south again. So it's like this conveyor belt. Water goes up to the north from the equator at the surface, then slowly gets down to the bottom, comes back down deep. Now, I mentioned there's mountains and valleys and stuff. Well, that deep water that comes whipping across the bottom occasionally goes over that incredible topography and makes these underwater waterfalls. And they can, just like on land, so it's gravity pulling water down, except this is at the bottom of the ocean. And probably the biggest waterfall on Earth is between Greenland and Iceland. There's a place there called the Denmark Straits, and a huge waterfall, like 5 times higher than Angel Falls. So very peculiar. Who would expect it, But if you thought about it, the currents, like the Gulf Stream, the water's got to come back south somehow. It doesn't just pile up in the Arctic, and so we should have figured that out. That in some places it's going to go over really steep cliffs, and then it's going to make underwater waterfalls.
That's very interesting. You also too. So you mentioned that you've done some work with the Titanic.
Yeah.
I guess if you wouldn't mind, so like I remember when the movie was out, and that was obviously like a really big deal. But for somebody like myself, I mean, I'm in my late 20s, so I wasn't really. I mean, I know that the Titanic was something of a popular. It was a popular incident even before the ship was discovered. But
Very much. Yep.
yeah, I mean, what I guess if you wouldn't mind, what was the thing that was so captivating about the Titanic that really led so many people?
So many people try to figure that out. So I came to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution right after my PhD. And I was invited to come here by Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic. In fact, it was right after he found the Titanic.
And when was that? Was that the late
85,
80s?
85, 86, yeah. He found it in 85 and really explored it in 86. And I came end of 86, 87-ish. And I was a scientist, so I studied science. I studied, like I said, underwater mountains and volcanoes and earthquakes and stuff. So Titanic, I kind of kept at arm's length, even though I saw all the buzz and excitement going on. In fact, Bob Ballard and Woods Hole never expected that kind of media attention and things like that. So little by little, though, I got to be more curious about Titanic. And because I was doing deep water mapping, and that's what it takes to do Titanic, and how to build new technology, how to use new technology, my interest started to overlap with Titanic. And over time, we've gone from these sort of blurry blue images of Titanic to absolutely crisp, beautiful images of Titanic. And, no matter where you go on the planet, the tip of Chile up to the Siberia, you say Titanic and people right away know what you're talking about. Some people don't care. I get that. Some people care an awful lot. I'd say, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people. If you go online, look at the different chat rooms and things like that, you'll find all sorts of Titanic stuff. And, and there's always a battle about should we leave the ship alone, or should we manage it for posterity's sake and to keep the legacy of the ship and the passengers on board alive for eternity, or do we, like I said, leave it there in the dark of the deep sea? So, in a way, we're compelled to keep going back. We're not picking up stuff. We're not treasure hunters and not in the salvage business, but we want to know more about the story. So if you find something that belonged to a person, or if you find, like the telegraph on Titanic, it's in danger right now because the ship is rusting away. And if the deck collapses or the ceiling falls in, this is a telegraph that sent out the SOS. So it's an important piece. So we're wondering, should we recover that? But I thought Titanic would die out in 88, 87, 88. And James Cameron, who made the movie, said, Titanic, every generation rediscovers Titanic. And I think that's absolutely true. That's what seems to be happening. Is if you say Titanic to the media that I got something for you get every major network and cable broadcasters and webcasters, you name it, show up. It's very bizarre. It's very, very, very strange. And I think we're compelled, at least the way I feel, that we've been so privileged to see the bottom of the ocean that we should do everything we can to bring Titanic to that audience.
Did you were you a consultant at all on the film?
No, let me think. No.
Okay.
Nope.
Did you, is the film, at least at that time, was it accurate to what?
Oh, yeah. Accurate, yeah. Well,
Okay.
Jim Cameron is probably, I would say, one of top three, if not the most intelligent person, most creative person in oceanography today. His ability to make technology, robots, cameras, his knowledge of the sea, and it's something. It's hard to believe, but he can hold his own against any engineer or any scientist because he loves it. He's driven by his own curiosity, and he insisted on accuracy. In fact, I heard a story that Neil deGrasse Tyson told him the stars were wrong for the night when they were out in their lifeboats, and Jim went back into the movie and changed the sky around so they were accurate. There was a documentary about Jim Cameron and his, I forget what it was called, 20 years below or 20, I don't know, I forget. But he had a team of us in California in his workshop, and he kept us there for days from morning till night till he felt confident that he got Titanic right. So yeah, he's very much interested in accuracy and telling the truth.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I mean, that movie. I mean, it's so interesting. Yeah, like I was saying that. I mean, people look back. I mean, it's still the second highest grossing film ever.
Well,
And I mean, I obviously for a lot of people, they got caught up in the love story that was going on. But
yep.
I mean, truly though, the draw. I mean, if you took out Titanic and I mean, if you called it something else, that movie
Hmm.
would not have made anywhere near the amount of money that it made.
Right. And I've never seen it for starters. I think I've
Oh,
seen
really?
clips of it. Nuh-uh. It's which is kind of sticks in Jim's brain, his head. But I don't know. I don't want to see that. I work on that, and I don't want to imagine all the suffering. It makes me laugh sometimes that every April 14th we get together in these gala parties and pop champagne when 1,500 people died that night. What are you celebrating exactly? But so I've kind of, I mean, it's important because it was that age of elegance and love story. I think the way Jim sold it, he told me was the way he sold it, he said Romeo and Juliet on that ship. And that was enough to sell it. And that's exactly what it is, kind of, right? Romeo and Juliet on that ship. So it was a certain age. And, Titanic, you make a good point, even for the ship, because it had two sister ships. There was a Titanic, and then it had the Olympic and the Britannic, which were all three like twins, triplets. And so had Titanic not hit an iceberg, you'd never hear the name probably. I'm sure you would never hear the name. So, yeah, the name is a draw in itself. Someone told me it's the third most recognized name on the planet. I find that hard to believe, but that's what's going around.
Wow.
So it's got something to it that attracts.
So that means that Titanic is it's either replaced McDonald's, Mickey Mouse, or Jesus. It's pushed out one of the three.
I'm with you. Although I don't know what goes. Yeah, I'm with you. I want to see the numbers to tell me it's the number three. Yeah, and Muhammad.
I mean, I feel like Titanic is big, but I'd have to see some kind of Google trend to say it's one of the
I
three
do know
biggest.
that if I went to, I do quite a bit of public speaking, and when I go, initially people will say, well, we don't want Titanic. It's been done. Our audience doesn't want that. And then like the day before or the morning of, they'll say, geez, well, we hope you're going to show a little bit of Titanic because the audience really wants to see that. So it's, there's something about that ship that is indescribable about why once it gets hooks in you, tough to turn away because there's something in there for everybody. Love stories, elegance, tragedy, all that stuff wrapped up in that one ship.
Where is it currently right now? Like, I mean, what is it, like, how, is it nearer to North America than it is Europe or?
The closest place is Newfoundland, Canada. It's about 300 miles, I think, south of Newfoundland. And the other way to look at it, it's about 1,000 miles straight out from New York City. It just goes straight out towards Europe. It's right about there, 1,000 miles out. Mm-hmm. So sitting in water, 4,000 meters of water, 12,000 feet. So that's about average depth of the ocean. So there it lies.
And it sank, what year was it, 1907 or 13?
1912.
1912,
April.
Okay.
Hit the iceberg on the 14th of April, sank on the 15th of April. And, the thing was, there's all these, you talk about misconceptions. There weren't enough lifeboats. Well, the idea of a lifeboat was not to get in one and row to North America. There are so many ships, just like aircraft today. That was the way you crossed the Atlantic. So there were dozens of ships in that neck of the woods. So the idea of a lifeboat is that you start to transfer people from the ship that's in trouble to the other ships. And, there were plenty, in one sense, of lifeboats on board the Titanic. So lots of misconceptions there too.
Mm. And how many, so you said, how many people passed away out of the total number of?
There's 2,000 some odd, 2,200, something like that, 2,300. And, I make Titanic enthusiasts furious because I don't know. I don't get the same sort of what's the word? I haven't studied the ship. I can't tell you exactly what it weighed or how long it was to the inch. There are people that can do that. So there's roughly 2,200 people on board. 1,500 died that night.
Wow.
So 700 were rescued.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. For some reason, I thought it was like 200 people died. Okay. Wow. That's way worse than I imagined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like I looked it up maybe a year or two ago, but the last survivor of the ship, didn't they pass away 5 or 10 years ago? Because they were like a baby when it happened, and they died at like 100, I guess, or 105.
Melvina Dean. Yeah, Melvina Dean. I think maybe in the 90s, 1990, somewhere inside there. She passed away, and she was a baby. But, there are all these relatives of the survivors that are meet all the time, and they talk quite often. In fact, my neighbor that I've lived next to them for 20 years saw my light laid on one night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and said, "Why was your light on?" I said, "Working on Titanic." And he said, "I never told you this, but my great-grandfather died on the Titanic." Amazing. For 20 years, I was next door to him, and he never told me about that story. But some of the stories that have been told of the survivors, the children of the survivors relaying some of the stories, pretty scary stuff. It's that's why I don't watch the movie. I don't like the whole idea of a ship sinking out from under you, and it's like in a way like the Hindenburg, except it took a lot longer for the Titanic to go down.
I mean, I know the movie, there's kind of a little bit of an undercurrent of this ship is, indestructible, this idea that, only God himself could, sink this thing. Was that really a huge element of why the ship sank, was hubris?
No, I don't. Well, there's always going to be a debate about whether they were really pushing to set a record across the Atlantic Ocean. And I think the general feeling is not. They didn't have all the boilers up and running. They still had 5 boilers, I think, that weren't running full speed. So I think the general feeling is it wasn't trying to set a record. But they were told that there was ice in that area. They fumbled the reports, the ice report. It never got to the captain, or it never got to them, or was ignored. But either way, other ships did tell them that there's ice ahead of you in your area. And they kept going at... what was the speed? 20 knots, 20 miles an hour, roughly, more than that. Yeah, and then clank. And so, we thought initially there'd be a giant gash. There was no giant gash. And we thought, well, it must be a lot of little gashes. There aren't a lot of little gashes, but what there are is that it dented the hull, and by doing that, it popped a lot of rivets that held the plates of the hull together, and then that lit in a lot of... you couldn't fix that. It's impossible to fix that kind of thing. So little by little, the ship went down. A whole bunch of errors, and I think the bit about even God couldn't, that whole bit couldn't sink her. A lot of that seems to be myth. I don't know if that's really true. They certainly didn't advertise that. They just advertised the luxury and the speed and things like that, but they never said it's unsinkable.
Okay. And then at the time when it was constructed too, I mean, was it actually one of like the greatest luxury ships on the planet? Like, so it was advertised as that and was built to be.
Well, that was Cunard. Yeah, that was Cunard Lines, and I was told that they were competing with other lines. And gee whiz, my memory, I can't remember the names of the other ships or the line, but there was a lot of competition about who could do the fastest and who could be the most elegant of the ships crossing the Atlantic. And that's why Cunard Lines did the 3 ships, Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic. And so it was all about, there was a lot of that going on about who's the best, best and fastest and most comfortable if you weren't first class. Yeah.
So you mentioned James Cameron earlier, and it sounds like you know him on something of a personal level. Have you worked with him on other projects, or are you working with him on like an Avatar 2 or something like that?
No, Bloopy. I haven't seen that either, by the way. I sent him an email today. We're looking at another ship that's sunk in the Antarctica. It was Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance. And again, Jim is if it's something that's never been done, it's Jim Cameron's the first person I would call, because he's just so out of the box. I think the Abyss, I had some input into the Abyss, but I have a lot of friends that he's leaned on for information, but no, not me so much.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the Abyss either, but I'm trying to think of, I don't remember what year that came out, but I do.
88, something like that, 89.
Because that was his first. Well, he kind of got. I guess he got his feet wet, so to speak, with Abyss, and then went for Titanic. I guess.
Well,
right?
he did Terminator too. He did the Terminator. At least once he did. Oh, he hits a whole bunch. That's the thing that cracks me up. Here's a guy that, and they'll say I do movies to pay for my ocean habit. He's also got a space habit. He holds his own. I think he works with NASA or the Jet Propulsion Lab on space exploration too. Guy's brilliant. That's all I can say. When he first came to Woods Hole, I told the engineers and the scientists, don't baby this guy, because he'll take you apart. And they learned pretty quickly that they didn't have to talk down to Jim Cameron, that he was right there with them. So it's really interesting. I started out, by the way, as a truck driver in Los Angeles, and he got into making movies, and then he got into this ocean thing. What a guy! He's one of the best explorers on the planet, and just so happens to make some of the most successful movies too.
I mean, he's one of the biggest directors of all time. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I feel like I like movies quite a bit, and I've watched a number of his films, and I mean, I love Terminator 2. That's probably one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's just so interesting to hear you talk about it. He sounds more like a scientist than he does what you would think of a typical film director.
Once he's got these different. I've seen different. I went to Europe with him a couple times. Once we went to Rolex in Switzerland. I went with Jim. That was really interesting, because I kept thinking, he said, come on, let's go to Rolex, and I'm going to be there it's going to be a day. And I'm thinking, who wants to go to a watch factory for a day? But it was Jim, so I said, sure. And I could have stayed there for a week. It was fascinating to me about how much detail they put in. And because it was Jim, they let us go into one of the rooms where all the gold and the silver and the platinum is. And right away, I knew I wanted to be an international criminal at the time. There's something. It's like The Ring. When I saw all that gold glittering and diamonds, and I said, this is what I want. Who needs science? And the other thing about Jim is he's a strict vegan, and because of the climate issues that cattle really does add a lot to climate. So when you travel with him, he eats vegan. And so here I was in Switzerland, and I had a deal with the hotel that when Jim and I came back, because we'd get back around 10, 11, and the room service would be closed, but I'd make a deal with them to have waiting for me in my room a cheeseburger and fries. And then, then the trouble was I had to hide the evidence, so I would slide the tray way down the hallway so it wouldn't be in front of my door. I don't think I've ever told Jim that story. But, a couple of beans and a carrot was not quite enough for me.
Well,
amazing guy.
If he happens to, if by some chance, if he emails you and he tells you, hey, I heard about that story, send me an email to let me know that somehow James Cameron listened to something that I was involved with. That'd be an incredible honor.
He has a way of, I think, his flying monkeys, I think, out there, like the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch, seem to find out. I think he must have someone that looks for his name different places and reports back to him, because I hear about it now and then. But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'm sure he will. Hi, Jim.
I'm sure. I asked about Avatar too because I've heard of. I mean, again, I mean, I'm not sure, if there's any kind of like NDA type of stuff that with like any kind of business dealings that you've had with him, but at least from just the what's gotten out in entertainment news type of stuff, I've heard that some of the stuff that he's doing with Avatar too. I mean, I've heard that he's doing a lot of underwater filming and things of that nature, and it sounds incredibly ambitious. And like when I've heard about this, I'm like, okay, well now I can see why the film's taken. The last Avatar came out 11 years ago, and I know that
Was that right? Is that right? It's 11 years.
Well, wow. So I mean, and I know that at the time, I mean, actually, I guess now Titanic's number 3 highest grossing film ever, and Avatar is now number 2 because the last Avengers movie pushed it down by like a couple $1 million, something like that. So I know for Avatar. I know for Avatar too that I mean I'm sure that there's I imagine the studios must have they want the sequel. I mean because the first film made so much money, and I mean just as I guess I've heard about the things that he's doing on the film. I mean it sounds so ambitious.
Jim Cameron, man. There's nothing such as he's making the state of the art all the time, and there's nothing routine. In his world, he's always doing something brand new. And I think, at least he was planning on doing Avatar 2, 3, and maybe 4 at the same time, that filming all the sequels all at once, which makes sense. It makes a lot of sense that while you've got all those blue people running around, that you would do it all at once. But, yeah, I said there's different James Camerons. There's the ocean explorer, James Cameron, out at sea. There's the filmmaker, James Cameron, which is a different creature altogether. And there's the nice guy, Jim Cameron, who's just an incredibly nice. I've been to his home. I've been to his ranch. He's just an incredibly nice guy, despite what you read in the press. The media has a way of slanting things. He is a perfectionist. I can say that much. He doesn't put up with fools too easily, and he wants to make the product good. But he's just a really nice guy, and a brilliant guy.
I mean, there's also this element too of when you've created so many great films, Aliens, both the Terminators, obviously Titanic, Avatar. I mean, we're getting into the realm where it's so, it's extremely rarefied air. I mean, it's the league of Spielberg and George Lucas, where it's there's not many people that are above it. But that's really interesting that you've done these things with them. But somehow Titanic was the one that there wasn't a lot of crossover.
Yeah, that's very strange. And the other thing that got me. So Titanic. Actually, the first time I met Jim was about Ernest Shackleton. He texted me, called me, I forget. But was about Ernest Shackleton, and then Titanic. But the TED conferences, by going to TED, opened up a whole new world to me that I wasn't familiar with. Because I was studying cracks on the seafloor, I thought I was next to God on the planet. Who doesn't? How dare anyone bother me? I studied cracks on the seafloor. And then I went to TED, and the worst thing you could do back in the day, in the late 90s, is to go to TED thinking you're the smartest guy in the room. It's ugly. Because the room was full of incredible men and women that have done incredible things, that are incredibly passionate. And but it opened my eyes up to this whole world of, TED stands for Technology, Education, Design. So by design, TED was made to be a mix of people. And again, I'm going back to before there were TED Talks, back to 1998-ish. It was a smaller audience, but it was very intimate. And it was tough. Being up on that stage was tough. But like I said, it really opened my eyes up to music, like Herbie Hancock and the like. It really opened my eyes up to that whole world, that cracks in the bottom of the ocean weren't all that important. Oddly enough, that audience found the stuff to be fascinating, the deep sea. So stuff that I thought was routine, they were really excited about. And I was excited. Like today, I talked to a guy Michael Green from Canada, Vancouver, who builds the world's tallest structures out of wood. Is building buildings out of wood, and that's and you can. The nice part about it, I guess, is you can see all this stuff. Well, I guess. I mean, you go to TED Talks and watch some of these talks. It's pretty fascinating. It's just I love it because when I talk to kids about exploration, I've been privileged. I was a horrible student, really, because I have ADD. You can't tell, can you? So I was a horrible student. And what got me through was my curiosity. I learned to cope and to follow my curiosity. So it pulled me through school eventually onto a PhD. But, I've always marveled at how other people, deal with stuff that they deal with. And, but what I tell kids is that, hey, look, you don't have to go to the bottom of the ocean to feel satisfied. I'd be happy working in the backyard, looking at how plants interact and how bugs, whatever they do. And sometimes, just close your eyes and dream, and that works. So there's a quote by Marcel Proust. It says, "The true voyage of exploration or of discovery is not so much in seeking new landscapes as in having new eyes," which means, to me, it's like if you go to the Grand Canyon, a lot of people have been to the Grand Canyon. And so if you thought that was exploration, why would you go? It's already been explored. It's not about that. It's about what it does to you personally to go to the Grand Canyon. You need to go because you have the new eyes and you're going to look at it in a different way than anyone else has. But, it's whole thing. I think we give science, I don't know. Science is, I believe in science. Let me start by saying that I do believe in science, and it ought to be believed in. But I don't think it's the end of it. I just think that being observant, living a life, again, following your passion. Music is awesome. I think everything is music. Art is incredible. There's a lot of great stuff going on.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question again. This might sound a little bit more of a kind of an outlandish question, but I mean,
sure.
Since you mentioned cracks at the bottom of the ocean, now I'm sure you probably have heard of the certain movies that have come out over the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years, something like that, where part of the plot of the film are that there's giant ancient animals or creatures that come from the bottom of the ocean. I mean, there's numerous ones. There's, oh my gosh, there's a movie called The Meg that came out a couple years ago, which has like a mega shark.
Megalodon, the giant shark.
I know that the idea.
The giant squid, the colossal squid, the huge, giant, deadly jellyfishes. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff in films.
I mean, I know that the idea of animals coming from, let's say, another dimension, obviously that's not possible, but I mean the idea that bigger animals than we might not necessarily predict, or let's say animals that are a little bit more ancient, is it possible that potentially some of them are still alive down there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the coelacanth is a fish that was people thought went extinct ages ago. Ugly looking strange fish, but it's not a big fish. But, I wouldn't, like I said, we've only been to, I mean, maybe make it 15%. And pretty much then we're talking about the seafloor, not the water above it. See, the thing is that light doesn't go very far in the ocean. So you can't see, you can see maybe 10 feet around you in the deep ocean. So what lives in there? And we don't know. I mean, we really don't. And there's surprises all the time. We find out now how animals communicate, and like what octopuses, how intelligent octopuses are, incredibly intelligent. How whales and dolphins communicate, all that kind of stuff that we never dreamed of before. There are lakes at the bottom of the sea. They look just like, I mean, it's super salty water. It's not fresh water. But when you look at it, it looks just like a lake at night. It's not mixed with the ocean above it. You see waves in it. You see a shoreline where animals live on the shoreline of this underwater lake. There's animals that live in the water of the lake that don't come up into the ocean. Animals that live in the ocean don't go down. Now, who would have thought that? So who knows what's. I'll tell you, sometimes in the sub, you can see big animals in the distance, the shadows. And, when we go, we make a lot of noise. The sub is very slow. And so big animals, it's easy for them to scoot out of the way. Don't know. The Kraken, the giant octopus that holds ships down, is that true? Not true? Beats me. I would hate to say no to some of that stuff because we just don't know for sure.
So, if we found something that, most people would describe as some kind of, I don't know, sea dinosaur potentially, or ocean dinosaur, sorry. Let's say in the next 20 years or something like that was discovered to be alive today, would you be totally, absolutely like, I cannot believe this changes everything that we've ever known?
Oh, it might be that's happened several times. The oceans change because something was found, changes everything. Like I said, those vents, those communities of life at the bottom, on top of that mountain range, completely changed the way we think about life. We always thought you had to have sunlight, and then plants, and then animals. But here we were, off of chemicals coming out of the Earth, which has huge implications for life on the moons of Jupiter, for instance. So now there's almost no doubt that there's life on other planets and in our solar system. So the idea of something revolutionary coming out of the ocean, it happens the more we see, the more we change the way we used to think. It's 70% of the Earth. Oh, I'll tell you one thing before I forget with my ADD. Fresh water. So you say, okay, so Dave, the water, the ocean, Earth is 70% water covered, and it's average 2 miles deep. That's a lot of water. But you wonder, how can we be so lacking fresh water? Well, if you took all the water off the planet, so if the planet was the size of a basketball, all the water would fit easily into a ping pong ball. That's all the water on the planet, all the oceans, all the glaciers, you name it. And then if you took the fresh water, it'd be no bigger than the head of a pin. So the Earth is the size of a basketball. All the fresh water is the size of a pin. And again, you could say, but you said 70%. Yeah, but I said 2 miles is average deep. But the oceans are like 5,000 miles across. So it's an incredibly thin layer of water on Earth. And that's all the fresh water. So there's not a lot of water on Earth at all. And if it doesn't go in the right places at the right time of year, in the right amounts, so we have a really hard time dealing with that. So, people we make, you said about misconceptions, that's one misconception right there, that, there's a lot of fresh water on Earth, and there ain't. Just isn't.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, definitely what David...
I'm sorry I'm blabbing, but, with COVID, no one talks to me anymore.
It's no problem, David. Well, definitely... I want to thank you.
My imaginary friends.
No, this is honest. This is very fascinating. Somebody like myself. My degree is more in the humanities. So in the social sciences. So I'm not necessarily a hard science kind of person, but I feel like when something is kind of more readily, or not readily, if it's something that's a little bit more, if it's complex, but it's spoken to me in a way that doesn't sound super complex, it's very fascinating to me then. If you went into all the, all the specifics, and you're like, this chemical, that chemical, this and that, you would lose me so quickly, but...
we do. Climate change, we try to teach people about all the bits about climate. It's like this to me. If you ordered pizza, and so some guy comes out, or woman, and starts to talk to you about the chemical breakdown of oregano. And someone else talks to you about sauce. I study sauces. And here's what I find out about sauces, the acidity, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then someone about cheese. And then someone says, let's look at how the cheese bonds with this. That's, just say, bring me the frickin' pizza.
That's it.
Stop it.
Being sold on that, where it's okay, I understand cheese as an ingredient, like you said, sauce and dough and meat. I understand those things, but if we're talking about the specifics of what goes into the sauce and what makes those ingredients, then you've lost
science me. Does. That's what science does.
And that's always one thing where, I mean, even when I was in grad school, when I read papers of even people in my own discipline, they would start off their papers and it just, I mean, well, so I have a master's in political science, and
Yep.
sometimes it would sound like gobbledygook. Like it would sound like something where I'm just like, I don't even know what
Yep.
we're even talking about. And it would be 2.5 pages of the abs. It would be 2.5 pages of the beginning of the document before it really got to any point that was like,
and,
oh, that's what they
yeah.
meant.
And every little thing's got to have a reference. Every little. It was a sunny day today. Okay, who said that first? It's one of those. So it's almost impossible to. It's just a horrible story. People learn from stories, and the story you tell about, like me, when I did the cracks in the seafloor, all techno jargon, principal transfer deformation zone, Riedel shears, and oh my God, it's a crack in the seafloor. It's simple as all that. So political science, you must be happy with the way things are. You must be busy these days. I should do a podcast about you. What the heck's going on?
Well, there's so much. I mean, honestly, like I'm a little, yeah, I'm sometimes I feel a little burnt out by it. And in addition to this podcast, I also have like a printed news publication that's kind of a part of the overarching like business of this, like this business called UCAS Studios. And I don't even talk about politics. I avoid it entirely.
So I start thinking about climate change. We blew it the first 2 or 3 times trying to explain it to people, and then pollution because we blew it. We said that shipwrecks were the worst pollutants, and they're not. They're like 35th, way down the row, because the microbes eat it. And the worst thing for the ocean, honestly, is it comes in the form of clear water, the herbicides and pesticides. So we blow those things instead of just doing the right thing to me, which is telling people the truth in the story. And you can say, we don't know about this, but none of it makes any sense if we don't have the political leadership. Scientists can do all they want about climate change and or about pollution, but if you don't have political leadership that's going to follow through on some of this stuff, then what's the point? What's the point of the exploration if no one shares your curiosity or passion for it? If they say, "Oh, that's garbage," and we don't need to listen to that.
Well, I think for any kind of political or any kind of issue where it comes to something where the scientific community, is, I don't want to say advocating for it, but in a sense, when the scientific community is bringing up an issue, I think that I think from an average person's standpoint, there's just the idea of like, how do you bring this to them in a digestible way? Like even kind of what I mentioned, even with our conversation today, it's like there's certain things that you can mention to me that the more scientific it gets, the more you begin to lose me because my mind doesn't go that deep with this knowledge. But I understand water, I understand the earth. So I mean, but
I got it.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, it's you hear something.
But how about this? How about if you're a miner or a fisherman or a cattle rancher or a farmer and the scientist shows up and says, you got to stop what you're doing because my calculations show that if you stop what you're doing, one, you're polluting the planet, and maybe in 300 years it's going to bounce back. And you sit there and go, oh, wait, I did this, I do this, my daddy did this, my granddaddy did this, my great-grand, and you come here, you got no skin in the game as a scientist and tell me that I got to stop what I'm doing because your hypothesis says that maybe, and right now you're going to bankrupt me with the idea that you're going to change things. So I think we made a big mistake there by just jumping the gun without looking at who this. I blame Al Gore a little bit for that. I believe me, we're making some big mistakes, but you got to think about people. You can't just. How would you like it, or how would scientists like it if fishermen said you got to stop that science stuff, and they wouldn't like it. To show up, whole communities, they're putting stressing because of. And I talk to miners as much as I can and fishermen as much as I can, and try to explain to them, here's what I see. They all got a great idea about what they see because they live it every day. Fishermen are awesome about what's going on in the ocean. And so they got something to say about it. And I think it's time that we start having conversations rather than saying, this is what we got to do. This is a global issue, just like the pandemic. Our climate and water is a global issue, and we need to get on that. But again, you got to have the leadership to make it all tick, and I don't see that right now.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and it's definitely, it's like you said. There's a lot of moving components to it. There's just a lot of elements where I think average people, they hear stuff. It's like, oh, we're going to stop this, we're going to do that. And then,
sure.
If that's your job, it's hard to, and I understand, there's the greater good. There's also people, like you were saying, the average guy's like, well, if we get rid of this coal mine in this state, like, how am I going to pay my electricity bill?
Yeah. Yeah, but the greater good is a very interesting phrase. Is it a phrase? Is it a phrase? Yeah. Who does that? And what is it? Is it the neighbor, your family? Is it the neighborhood? Is it the village, the town, the city, the state? Who cares about what? And we'll do something for the greater good. And I don't know the answer to that. I got asked that question once in a TV show. I forget what the name of it was, but someone said, when's the last time humanity did something for the greater good? And I don't know, don't know. When's the last time we all pulled together? All meaning all. And don't know.
Yeah, I don't think humanity's ever done everyone together. You can maybe make an argument, World War II, stopping the Nazis. But even then it was 100% because there was the Nazis. So, it wasn't everybody, but a lot of people.
Yeah, the Axis, I know. And like I said, it's funny, if you watched humanity from space and saw the issues we're coping with, the freshwater issues, the climate issues, et cetera, the pandemic issues, I think you'd think we were crazy. We're not advanced at all, that we don't recognize that we're on this little rock and with limited atmosphere and limited water supply, and yet we act like idiots. It's pretty weird, and I don't know how you turn it back. How do you change it? Especially when a developing world wants to have the same kinds of things that we had, that the U.S. had, that England had, and France and Spain. They want some of that, and how do you say no? I don't know. Tough. It's tough.
It absolutely is, and definitely. Well, David, this has definitely been a very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. And how can we follow the things that you put out, like in the public realm? Do you? I guess, is there stuff that you put out that the normal population can access and read? Because I'm sure you write academic journals and things like that are maybe.
No, not anymore. Nope, I'm retired, so I want to stay away from the academic stuff and get more into the people stuff. And I'm working on it now. I've got Facebook where everyone snarls at me and I snarl back at them, and then occasionally show pictures of my roses and stuff. We're looking at ways to get. It's not just me; it's a group of us. Looking at how do we get our info out into the public at large without, because a lot of it's very visual and enjoyable. So it's not, and all stories, no equation free. So we're working on it. I'll let you know so you can mention it. But
if you have anything like that too, if you have any pieces that are readable for average people, and I don't mean that any insulting way, I just mean that in the sense like what you said, equation free stuff. If you have any of that or any images, definitely send them over to me, and I love to run them in the newspaper.
All right. I will talk to my buddy who's an image guy, and you'll get video clips and some incredible images of life at the seafloor, some incredible images of Titanic. So I'll be happy to send those. It'd be great. That's our whole thing, is get the stuff out. What got me out of the really, I sold shoes for 7 years. We don't need to get into that after school because I was too stupid to be a scientist. What got me ignited again was one image in a National Geographic. And so I know there are other kids out there, and even some adults, that are looking for that image. A single image might turn them completely around, and that's why I want to cast the net as far as possible. It doesn't do any good sitting on my computer or on a bookshelf. Let's get it out. Get it out to the public so they can see what we're seeing.
All right, David, well, that sounds good. I'll keep an eye out for that email, and thank you again for coming on, and have a good rest of your day.
Same to you. Take care.
All right, you too.